Zektar stood 8 feet tall and his dark armor gleamed under the lights of the command bridge. His forearms moved quickly across the control panels as he read the reports from the scout ships. The Vorthak Empire had sent him to study their next target, and he was very good at his job. For 20 years he had helped plan attacks on other worlds, and every single one had fallen within days. The blue planet on his screen looked peaceful and weak. The humans who lived there had barely learned to travel between their own planets. Their ships were small and slow compared to Vorthak war vessels. The intelligence reports showed they spent most of their time fighting each other instead of building strong defenses. Zektar clicked his mandibles together as he thought about how easy this conquest would be. The humans had divided themselves into hundreds of small nations that could not work together. They used primitive weapons that could barely scratch Vorthak armor. Their largest ships carried maybe 50 crew members, while the smallest Vorthak cruiser had 3,000 warriors aboard. Commander Vexhai walked over to Zektar and looked at the same reports. Vexhai had led successful invasions of 12 different worlds, and he laughed when he saw the human military data. The humans called their strongest weapons nuclear missiles, but even those could not break through Vorthak energy shields. Their most advanced fighters moved so slowly that Vorthak point defense systems could destroy them before they got close enough to attack. The human population was spread across 7 continents on their homeworld. They had small colonies on 2 nearby planets and a few space stations around their system. Total human population was less than 15 billion, which was tiny compared to the Vorthak Empire that controlled over 200 billion citizens across 17 star systems. Zektar studied the cultural reports about humans and found them even more encouraging. These creatures seemed to value individual survival above everything else. When other species had faced Vorthak invasion, fleets, most of them had surrendered quickly to avoid massive casualties. The few that tried to fight usually gave up after losing a few battles when they realized resistance was hopeless. Humans appeared to be even weaker mentally than physically. Their history showed constant warfare between their own kind over resources, territory, and ideas. They had never faced a real external threat that forced them to unite. The Vorthak analysts predicted that once human governments saw the size of the invasion fleet, they would surrender immediately rather than watch their people die uselessly. The invasion plan was simple and had worked perfectly on every other world. 12 Vorthak battlecruisers would jump into the human system and position themselves around the main planet. They would broadcast surrender demands and demonstrate their power by destroying a few military targets. Once the humans saw they could not win, they would give up and accept Vorthak rule. Zektar had been chosen as the tactical advisor because he understood how weak species thought. His job was to study human responses and recommend the minimum force needed to complete the conquest. The High Command wanted to avoid unnecessary destruction because healthy slaves and intact infrastructure were more valuable than smoking ruins. The fleet commander was Admiral Thraxon, who had never lost a single battle in 30 years of service. Thraxon looked at the human system maps and declared that the invasion would be completed in less than 1 solar cycle. He assigned only 3 cruisers to actually attack the human homeworld, while the other 9 ships would secure the outer planets and space stations. Zektar felt confident as he reviewed the final invasion plans. The humans had managed to detect Vorthak scout ships approaching their system, but their response had been pathetic. Instead of preparing strong defenses or trying to negotiate, they had sent a few small patrol ships to investigate. Those ships had been easily destroyed by the scouts, and the humans learned nothing useful about Vorthak capabilities. As the invasion fleet prepared to jump into hyperspace, Zektar received the latest intelligence updates. Human military forces were gathering around their homeworld, but their numbers were laughably small. They had perhaps 200 combat ships total, and most of those were converted cargo vessels with weapons bolted onto their hulls. The humans called this desperate collection the United Earth Defense Force, but Zektar knew it would be destroyed within hours of the first battle. The jump to hyperspace felt smooth and familiar. Zektar had made this journey to conquest many times before. In a few days, he would be walking on another defeated world and cataloging its resources for the Empire. The humans would become slaves like all the other species that had tried to resist Vorthak expansion. When the fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the human system, Zektar immediately began scanning for defensive positions. The humans had placed their ships in a standard protective formation around their homeworld, exactly as the analysts had predicted. Their technology was so primitive that Vorthak sensors could track every human vessel from across the entire system. Admiral Thraxon opened communications with the human homeworld and transmitted the standard surrender message. He demanded that all human military forces stand down immediately and prepare to be boarded. He gave them one standard day to comply before the Vorthak fleet would begin destroying human cities. Zektar expected the humans to respond with either immediate surrender or desperate pleas for mercy. Instead, the reply came from someone who identified himself as Admiral Jake Morrison of the United Earth Defense Force. The human's message was short and made no sense to Zektar at all. Morrison simply said, "Come and take it," and then cut the communication link. Zektar looked at Commander Vexhai in confusion. Neither of them had ever received such a response before. Most species begged for time to consider the surrender terms or tried to negotiate for better treatment of their civilians. A few had responded with threats or insults, but those had come from warrior cultures that at least understood they were choosing death over dishonor. The human response seemed to show neither fear nor bravery. It was as if Admiral Morrison had not understood that his entire species was about to be conquered by a vastly superior force. Zektar wondered if humans were simply too primitive to grasp the reality of their situation. Admiral Thraxon decided to show the humans what Vorthak power could do. He ordered 3 cruisers to destroy the human space stations orbiting their outer planets. The stations were small and lightly defended, so they exploded quickly when hit by Vorthak plasma cannons. Thraxon expected this demonstration to terrify the humans into immediate surrender. Zektar watched the tactical displays as the human response came in. Instead of panic or surrender messages, the humans began moving, their ships into new positions. They were not retreating or trying to hide behind their planet's defenses. They were actually preparing to attack the Vorthak fleet. This confused Zektar greatly. The humans had just seen their outer defenses destroyed without being able to fight back. Any rational species would understand that resistance was impossible. Yet somehow the humans seemed to think they could actually win a battle against ships that were 10 times larger and 100 times more powerful than anything they possessed. Commander Vexhai suggested that humans might be too stupid to understand mathematics. Perhaps their primitive brains could not process the size difference between the two fleets. Zektar thought this might be true, but something about the human movements bothered him. Their ships were moving with purpose and coordination that suggested intelligence, not stupidity. The first real battle happened near the 4th planet in the human system. A group of human patrol ships tried to intercept a Vorthak cruiser that was moving to secure the mining colonies there. The humans attacked with missiles and energy weapons that barely scratched the cruiser's shields. The Vorthak ship destroyed 5 human vessels in less than 10 minutes. But something strange happened during that battle. When the human ship started taking damage, they did not retreat or surrender. Instead, they kept attacking even when their weapons were clearly useless. One human ship called the Liberty kept firing its guns even after losing its main engines and life support systems. The ship drifted dead in space, but its automated weapons continued shooting until the Vorthak cruiser finally destroyed it completely. Zektar had never seen anything like this before. Every other species he had fought would withdraw damaged ships to save the crews and equipment. Humans seemed to think that continuing a hopeless attack was more important than preserving their people and resources. It made no tactical sense at all. The pattern continued as more battles erupted across the human system. Human ships would engage Vorthak forces even when vastly outnumbered and outgunned. They would fight until their vessels were completely destroyed, rather than surrender or retreat when the situation became hopeless. Zektar began to wonder if humans had some kind of mental defect that prevented them from recognizing when they were beaten. Captain Lisa Parker commanded a small human frigate called the Defiance that attacked a Vorthak supply convoy near the system's asteroid belt. Her ship was alone against 3 Vorthak escorts and had no chance of victory. The escorts quickly disabled the Defiance's weapons and engines, leaving it helpless and drifting. Zektar monitored the communications as the Vorthak ships prepared to board the human vessel and capture its crew. Standard procedure was to take prisoners for interrogation and then use them as slaves. But Captain Parker had other plans that made no sense to any Vorthak tactical doctrine. Instead of surrendering, Parker used the Defiance's remaining power to overload its reactor core. She rammed her crippled ship directly into the largest Vorthak escort at maximum speed. The collision destroyed both vessels completely, but also damaged the other two escorts badly enough that they had to retreat for repairs. Zektar stared at the tactical display in shock. Parker had traded one small human ship for significant damage to 3 larger Vorthak vessels. In pure mathematical terms, it was actually a victory for the humans, even though they had lost their ship and crew. But what bothered Zektar was that Parker had chosen this course of action, knowing she would die. Every Vorthak warrior understood that death in battle was honorable, but they also understood that living to fight another day was tactically superior. A warrior who threw away his life uselessly was considered a fool, not a hero. Yet Captain Parker had calculated her attack carefully and achieved real military results through her sacrifice. Similar incidents began happening throughout the human system. Human crews would deliberately destroy their own ships if it meant damaging Vorthak vessels. They would use broken fighters as guided missiles. They would overload power cores to create massive explosions when Vorthak ships came too close. Every human defeat somehow resulted in Vorthak casualties. Commander Vexhai started to look worried as the casualty reports came in. The Vorthak fleet was still winning every battle, but they were losing ships and crew members at a much higher rate than expected. If this pattern continued, the invasion might take weeks instead of days. The humans were making the conquest expensive, even though they could not prevent it. Admiral Thraxon decided to end human resistance quickly by destroying one of their moons. He positioned a battle cruiser in orbit around the human homeworld and charged its main cannon. The weapon could crack a small moon in half, and the destruction would be visible from the planet's surface. Surely this demonstration would break human morale and force them to surrender. The moon exploded in a brilliant flash that could be seen across the entire human system. Chunks of rock and ice scattered in all directions, creating a spectacular light show. Thraxon broadcast another surrender demand, expecting immediate compliance from the terrified human population. Instead, something completely unexpected happened. The human military forces did not retreat or panic after seeing their moon destroyed. They actually increased their attacks on Vorthak positions throughout the system. More human ships launched from hidden bases on asteroids and small planets. Instead of being intimidated by Vorthak power, the humans seemed to be getting angrier. Zektar read the intercepted human communications and found messages that made no sense to him. Human commanders were telling their crews that the moon's destruction proved the aliens had to be stopped at any cost. They spoke about protecting their families and their world even if it meant certain death. They used words like honor and duty, but applied them in ways that seemed backwards to Vorthak thinking. A human fighter pilot named Danny Rodriguez transmitted a message to all ships in his squadron just before attacking a Vorthak destroyer. He said that his daughter lived on the planet below, and he would rather die fighting than let her grow up as a slave. Rodriguez crashed his damaged fighter into the destroyer's bridge, killing himself, but also eliminating the ship's command crew. Zektar tried to understand this human behavior by comparing it to Vorthak psychology. Vorthak warriors fought bravely when they had a chance to win glory and advancement. They would accept death if it brought honor to their families and clans. But they would never waste their lives in hopeless gestures that accomplished nothing important. Yet humans seemed to think that dying while fighting was more valuable than living under Vorthak rule. They treated certain death as preferable to possible slavery. This attitude made their tactical decisions unpredictable and dangerous, because they were willing to sacrifice anything to inflict damage on their enemies. Zektar requested permission to study captured human prisoners because their behavior made no sense, according to any tactical manual in the Vorthak database. Admiral Thraxon agreed because understanding enemy psychology was important for future conquests. The Vorthak had encountered 43 different intelligent species and developed techniques for breaking the will of any type of alien mind. The first prisoner brought to Zektar was Sergeant Danny Rodriguez, who had been captured when his boarding party tried to take over a Vorthak supply ship. The attack had failed completely, and most of Rodriguez's team had been killed in the fighting. Rodriguez himself was wounded and had been unconscious for 2 days, while Vorthak medics kept him alive for interrogation. Zektar entered the detention cell expecting to see a broken and terrified prisoner ready to cooperate in exchange for better treatment. Instead, he found Rodriguez sitting calmly on his sleeping platform and studying the cell's construction with obvious interest. The human looked up when Zektar walked in and showed no fear, despite being faced with a creature twice his size and obviously built for killing. Rodriguez spoke first, which surprised Zektar because most prisoners waited to be questioned before saying anything. The human asked about the metal composition of Vorthak hull plating and wanted to know how their energy shields worked. He seemed more interested in gathering intelligence than in his own survival. Zektar explained that Rodriguez was in no position to be asking questions. The human was a prisoner of war and would be executed if he did not provide useful information about human military capabilities. Rodriguez listened politely, and then asked if Vorthak body armor was made from the same materials as their ship hulls, because he had noticed some differences in the scanner readings. This conversation continued for hours with Rodriguez asking technical questions about Vorthak equipment and tactics while completely ignoring threats to his own safety. Zektar had interrogated hundreds of prisoners from dozens of species, and none of them had ever behaved this way. Most prisoners either begged for mercy, or tried to bargain for their lives, or became angry and defiant. Rodriguez seemed genuinely curious about his captors, as if he was conducting research. When Zektar finally managed to ask Rodriguez about human defensive positions, the sergeant provided accurate information without hesitation. He described the locations of hidden bases and the number of ships available to each human commander. But he also asked questions about Vorthak force deployment and seemed to be calculating something in his head. Zektar realized that Rodriguez was treating the interrogation as an information exchange rather than a one-sided questioning session. The human was learning as much about the Vorthak as he was revealing about human capabilities. This had never happened before in any interrogation Zektar had conducted. The next prisoner was pilot Amy Chen, who had been shot down during an attack on a Vorthak cruiser. Chen had ejected from her fighter just before it crashed, but she had been badly burned when Vorthak weapons hit her escape pod. The medical team said she would recover, but she was in considerable pain. Chen's behavior was similar to Rodriguez's, but even more disturbing to Zektar. She asked detailed questions about Vorthak flight patterns and wanted to know how their targeting systems worked. When Zektar told her that providing such information would help humans kill more Vorthak soldiers, Chen smiled and said that was exactly what she hoped to accomplish. Zektar had never encountered a prisoner who openly admitted to planning more attacks against their captors. Every other species tried to convince the Vorthak that they would be cooperative and peaceful if allowed to live. Chen seemed to think that her capture was just a temporary setback and she would eventually escape to rejoin the fighting. Engineer Pete Sullivan was the third prisoner, and his attitude was the most confusing of all. Sullivan had been captured when Vorthak forces overran a human repair facility hidden in an asteroid field. He had been working on damaged human ships and had extensive knowledge of their technology and tactics. Sullivan answered every question about human capabilities truthfully and provided detailed technical information that would be very useful to the Vorthak war effort. But he also asked questions about Vorthak engineering and power systems that showed he was trying to understand their weaknesses. When Zektar asked Sullivan why he was cooperating so freely, the engineer explained that he wanted to help end the war as quickly as possible. But then Sullivan added that he hoped the information he provided would help other humans develop better weapons to use against the Vorthak in future battles. Zektar began to understand something disturbing about human psychology. These prisoners were not thinking about their own survival, or even about the current war. They were focused on a longer conflict that they expected to continue, even if their entire fleet was destroyed and their homeworld conquered. Rodriguez confirmed this when he told Zektar that humans had already evacuated millions of civilians to hidden colonies outside the system. He said that even if Earth fell, the war would continue from those secret bases. The current battle was just the first round in a much longer fight. This revelation shocked Zektar because it meant the humans had been planning for defeat from the very beginning. They had never expected to win the first war against the Vorthak. Instead, they had prepared to lose while gathering as much information as possible about their enemies. Amy Chen explained that every human pilot had been ordered to study Vorthak ships and tactics during combat. They were supposed to transmit their observations to hidden recording stations before being destroyed. The entire human fleet was functioning as a reconnaissance force rather than a serious military threat. Pete Sullivan revealed that human engineers had been analyzing wreckage from every destroyed Vorthak vessel. They were learning about Vorthak technology and looking for ways to build weapons that could penetrate their defenses. Sullivan said that humans were very good at copying and improving alien technology once they understood how it worked. Zektar realized that the humans were treating this invasion as a learning experience rather than a final battle. They expected to lose, but they planned to make their defeat as educational as possible. Every dead human pilot and destroyed human ship was providing intelligence that would be used in future conflicts. The most disturbing revelation came when Rodriguez used materials from his cell to create a crude weapon. He had somehow turned pieces of his sleeping platform and food container into a sharp blade. When Zektar discovered the weapon, Rodriguez immediately attacked, despite knowing that success was impossible. The escape attempt failed quickly because Rodriguez was outnumbered and weakened by his injuries. But before losing consciousness, he managed to damage several important systems in the detention area. More importantly, he spoke his observations about prison security loud enough for the other prisoners to hear. Zektar understood that Rodriguez had never expected to escape successfully. The attack was designed to gather information about Vorthak security procedures and share that knowledge with other humans. Even when captured and helpless, these creatures continued to function as intelligence-gathering assets for their species. This realization made Zektar feel something he had never experienced before during an interrogation. He began to worry that keeping human prisoners might be more dangerous than killing them immediately. These creatures seemed capable of learning useful information from any situation and finding ways to share that knowledge with other humans. The war took a dangerous turn when Vorthak forces began occupying human colonies, and Zektar discovered that humans fought differently on the ground than they did in space. Admiral Thraxon had assigned him to oversee the conquest of a human settlement called New Boston because the colonists had supposedly surrendered and agreed to cooperate with their new rulers. Zektar led a force of 200 Vorthak soldiers to the colony, expecting to find frightened civilians ready to submit to imperial authority. The settlement appeared normal from orbit with no signs of military activity or defensive preparations. Long-range scans showed approximately 5,000 humans going about their daily business as if nothing had changed. When the Vorthak transports landed in the colony's main square, the humans gathered to watch but showed no signs of fear or hostility. Their leader was a woman named Katie Morrison, who identified herself as the settlement's administrator. She welcomed the Vorthak forces politely and offered to provide housing and food for the occupation troops. Zektar felt suspicious about how easily the humans had accepted defeat, but all his scans showed normal civilian activity. The humans went to work in their factories and farms exactly as they had before the invasion. Children attended school and families gathered for meals just like any peaceful colony. For 3 days, the occupation proceeded smoothly with no signs of resistance or sabotage. The humans answered questions about their industrial capacity and provided detailed maps of their settlement. They seemed eager to prove that they would be valuable and cooperative subjects of the Vorthak Empire. Then everything changed during what should have been a routine inspection of the colony's main power plant. Zektar was examining the facility with a team of engineers when Katie Morrison appeared with a group of civilians who claimed they wanted to show the Vorthak some interesting features of their technology. Morrison led them deeper into the power complex while explaining how the humans had modified standard fusion reactors to work more efficiently. She pointed out various improvements and modifications that might be useful for Vorthak engineering projects. The tour seemed educational and harmless until Morrison stopped in front of a control panel and smiled. She told Zektar that the humans had made one very important modification to their power plant that the Vorthak engineers might want to study carefully. Then she pressed a button that started a chain reaction throughout the entire colony. Every building and every piece of equipment began exploding in a carefully coordinated sequence. Zektar realized that the entire settlement had been converted into a massive trap designed to destroy the occupation force. The humans had spent 3 days moving explosives into position while pretending to cooperate with their conquerors. Morrison and her people had been planning this attack since before the Vorthak ships had even landed. The explosions continued for several minutes, as the colonists systematically destroyed everything they had built over many years. Factories, workshops, homes, schools, and even playgrounds erupted in flames as the humans eliminated anything that might be useful to their enemies. They were willing to destroy their own civilization, rather than let the Vorthak benefit from their labor. Zektar managed to reach his transport ship as buildings collapsed around him, but many of his soldiers were trapped in the underground tunnels that connected the colony's major structures. The humans had turned their own sewer and utility systems into death traps that buried Vorthak troops under tons of rubble. Katie Morrison was killed in the first explosion, along with most of the other colonists, but her final transmission was broadcast to every human settlement in the system. She told them that cooperation with the Vorthak was impossible, and that resistance was the only acceptable response to invasion. Her last words were tactical advice about how to set up similar traps in other colonies. This pattern repeated itself across dozens of human settlements, as Zektar realized that every act of surrender had been a deception. The humans were using their own civilians as weapons against the occupation forces. They would pretend to cooperate, while secretly preparing devastating attacks that destroyed both the colonists and their Vorthak overseers. The psychological impact on Vorthak soldiers became severe as they realized that every human interaction might be a trap. Simple requests for food or medical supplies could be attempts to poison Vorthak troops. Offers to share information about local conditions might be designed to lead soldiers into ambush sites. A human teacher named Rick Taylor managed to infiltrate Zektar's own command ship by hiding among a group of refugees who claimed they wanted to escape from their fanatical neighbors. Taylor spent 2 weeks pretending to be grateful for Vorthak protection, while secretly studying the ship's security systems and gathering intelligence about Vorthak command procedures. When Taylor finally revealed himself, he did not attempt to destroy the ship or capture important prisoners. Instead, he planted listening devices throughout the vessel and downloaded critical information about Vorthak military communications. He left behind a note that said humans were learning everything about Vorthak tactics and would use that knowledge in future battles. Taylor's escape was even more disturbing than his infiltration because it showed how thoroughly the humans had studied their enemies. He avoided every security checkpoint and evaded every tracking system by using techniques that demonstrated detailed knowledge of Vorthak procedures. The humans had learned to think like their captors. Zektar began to understand that the entire human population was functioning as a military intelligence network. Civilians were gathering information about Vorthak equipment and tactics then, transmitting that data to hidden bases throughout the galaxy. Every human who died in the fighting took valuable intelligence about their enemies with them to their graves. The final shock came when Zektar discovered that human children were being used as intelligence assets. A group of young humans at a school had been systematically studying Vorthak soldiers and recording their observations about alien behavior and technology. The children had learned to identify different types of Vorthak equipment and could predict their tactical responses. When Vorthak forces raided the school, they found detailed drawings and notes that showed the children understood military concepts that most adult civilians would never comprehend. The students had been trained to observe and analyze everything about their occupiers while pretending to be harmless and innocent. Zektar realized that humanity was fighting a war unlike anything in Vorthak experience. They were not trying to win individual battles or hold specific territory. Instead, they were conducting a systematic intelligence-gathering operation that turned every human interaction into a learning opportunity. Every conversation with a Vorthak soldier provided information about alien psychology. Every destroyed human settlement revealed new data about Vorthak weapons and tactics. Every captured human prisoner became a source of intelligence about enemy procedures and weaknesses. The humans had transformed their entire species into a weapon, designed to study and ultimately defeat their conquerors. They were willing to sacrifice countless lives and destroy their own civilization if it meant learning enough about the Vorthak to ensure victory in future conflicts. For the first time in his military career, Zektar began to feel afraid of an enemy species. The humans were not stronger or more advanced than the Vorthak, but they were something far more dangerous. They were a race of creatures who treated learning about their enemies as more important than their own survival. The final battle above Earth forced Zektar to witness something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Admiral Thraxon had grown tired of human resistance and decided to end the war by destroying their homeworld completely. The Vorthak fleet positioned itself in orbit around Earth and prepared to burn the planet's surface until nothing could survive there. Admiral Jake Morrison commanded the last major human fleet, which consisted of fewer than 50 combat vessels against 12 massive Vorthak battlecruisers. The humans were outnumbered and outgunned so badly that the coming battle could only have one possible outcome. Yet Morrison's forces moved into attack formation, as if they actually believed they could achieve victory. Zektar monitored human communications as Morrison received a coded transmission from the hidden colonies where human civilians had been evacuated. The message confirmed that all non-combatants had reached safety beyond Vorthak sensor range. Morrison acknowledged the transmission and then issued an order that made no sense to any Vorthak tactical doctrine. Morrison activated something called Protocol Omega, which apparently meant that all remaining human forces would implement coordinated suicide attacks designed to gather final intelligence about Vorthak capabilities. The humans were not trying to win the battle or save their planet. They were planning to use their own deaths as weapons against their enemies. The human ships began their attack in a pattern that seemed completely insane to Zektar. Instead of concentrating their fire on individual Vorthak vessels, they spread out to engage as many different targets as possible. Each human ship faced multiple Vorthak opponents and had no chance of survival, but they continued attacking with desperate efficiency. Captain Lisa Parker commanded a heavy cruiser called the Defiance that attacked Admiral Thraxon's flagship directly. Her ship was destroyed within minutes, but not before Parker transmitted detailed scans of the Vorthak command vessel's shields and armor configuration. She used her final moments to gather intelligence that would be useful to other humans in future battles. Similar scenes played out across the battlefield as human crews deliberately sacrificed their vessels to study Vorthak defensive systems. Pilots would ram their fighters into enemy ships while recording data about hull composition and structural weak points. Engineers would overload their reactors to create massive explosions that revealed information about Vorthak damage control procedures. Commander Pete Sullivan used his ship's sensors to analyze Vorthak point defense systems while under heavy fire. He transmitted his findings to hidden recording stations just before his vessel exploded. The data he gathered showed exactly how Vorthak weapons targeted incoming missiles and identified blind spots that future human attacks could exploit. Zektar watched in horror as Admiral Morrison's flagship engaged 3 Vorthak battlecruisers simultaneously. The human ship was torn apart by enemy fire, but Morrison kept fighting until his vessel was nothing but a drifting wreck. His final transmission was not a surrender or a plea for mercy, but a complete tactical analysis of Vorthak combat doctrine. Morrison's last words were a message to the hidden human colonies scattered throughout the galaxy. He told them that Phase 1 of their resistance had been completed successfully. Every human death had provided valuable intelligence about Vorthak capabilities and weaknesses. The real war would begin in 72 standard hours when Phase 2 commenced. Zektar realized that the entire invasion had been part of a human plan that stretched across multiple generations. The humans had never intended to win this battle. They had designed their defeat to be as educational as possible, so that future human forces would know exactly how to destroy the Vorthak Empire. Every human pilot who died transmitted targeting data for Vorthak ships. Every destroyed human vessel revealed new information about alien technology. Every failed human attack identified weaknesses in Vorthak defenses that could be exploited later. The humans had turned their own extinction into a comprehensive intelligence-gathering operation. The final revelation came when Zektar discovered that Morrison had been uploading massive amounts of tactical data to hidden human bases throughout his final battle. The transmission included detailed specifications for every type of Vorthak weapon and complete analysis of their combat tactics. Morrison had spent his last moments creating a manual that would teach other humans how to destroy their enemies. As the last human ships burned in space above Earth, Zektar tried to understand what he had witnessed. The humans had fought a war they knew they could not win, but they had used their defeat to prepare for conflicts that might not happen for decades or centuries. They thought about warfare in terms of generations rather than individual battles. Admiral Thraxon declared victory and prepared to claim Earth as another conquered world. But Zektar felt deeply troubled by what the humans had accomplished. They had lost every battle and sacrificed their entire civilization, but they had also gathered enough intelligence to eventually destroy the Vorthak Empire. Zektar spent the following days studying the intercepted human transmissions and realized that humanity's real strength was not their technology or their courage. It was their ability to learn from defeat and share that knowledge with future generations. They treated every disaster as a learning opportunity and every death as an investment in eventual victory. The humans had scattered hidden colonies across dozens of star systems that the Vorthak had never detected. Those colonies now possessed complete information about Vorthak military capabilities and were already beginning to build weapons designed specifically to exploit alien weaknesses. Morrison's final gift to his species was the knowledge they needed to win the next war. Zektar submitted his final report to the Vorthak High Command with recommendations that shocked the military leadership. He advised immediate withdrawal from human space and establishment of a permanent quarantine zone around all systems that might contain human colonies. He warned that continued contact with humanity would inevitably result in the complete destruction of the Vorthak Empire. His report concluded that the Vorthak had made a fatal error by assuming that humans were prey animals like every other species they had conquered. Instead, they had encountered something far more dangerous than any traditional enemy. Humans were apex predators who hunted across generations and viewed individual battles as mere data-gathering exercises. Zektar's final observation was that, somewhere in the darkness of space, human colonies were already preparing the weapons and tactics that would destroy every Vorthak world. The humans were not mourning their defeat or planning revenge. They were simply continuing their research into the most effective methods for eliminating their enemies. He wrote that he had learned what real fear was, and it was the knowledge that a species existed that could turn any defeat into future victory through systematic intelligence gathering and generational planning. The humans would return someday with perfect knowledge of Vorthak weaknesses, and when that happened, the Empire would fall. The Vorthak High Command accepted Zektar's recommendations and ordered the immediate evacuation of all forces from human space. For the first time in their history, the Vorthak Empire retreated from a conquered system and warned other galactic civilizations to avoid contact with the species known as humanity.